Well, I avoided the leaks and the spoilers, and I made it all the way to the official release of Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender. But if you're an Avatar fan, is it something that you need to watch? Welcome back, everyone. We're here to talk about Avatar Aang, the movie. I'm very excited to be talking about this with you. I've been waiting patiently to watch it because I know it was leaked and everyone was talking about it and everyone was asking me about it, and I was like, I'm trying to actually not look until it officially drops. I do try my best to avoid leaks. And before we get into it, I would also like to ask you a question about our approach to telling stories in the Avatar universe. Do you want more stories like this that are untold tales of Aang and the gang? Or would you rather that we let this story end and move on to new stories, to new characters, to potentially new avatars in the world? Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments below. So let's start off by talking about the animation in this movie, because the animation is absolutely killer. They did such a good job with the animation in this. I adored it. I thought it looked great. It's very epic and it's very emotive as well. And I feel like they also kind of aged up the animation a bit. I mean, it is 2026 when this movie is dropping, so the animation technology, what we can maybe do with animation, we've come further along. But it also just feels like the style has evolved a little bit, and that's not to say that it looks too different. I think it still looks similar enough that it connects back to the original animated series, but there's just something that feels a little bit more mature about it. And I appreciated that. I think it works. We also do have a new voice cast coming in, and I think the choice to recast here was about making sure that we had voices that would serve the characters in this stage of their life, so they didn't want anything to sound too much the same to what we'd already had. They wanted this to be a different sound for these characters, which is why we have a new cast. But I do think the new cast does a great job and still really honors the voices that we've had in the past for our main cast. So it doesn't feel too different or too disjointed. I liked all of the voice acting. I thought it was quite good, and I even love that we got some new characters, some new voices in this for new characters. Taika Waititi is in this, Ke Huy Quan is in this, and we even get Dave Bautista as Tagah, who is a very important character for this story. I don't know how much I want to go into everything in terms of spoilers. I think I'll try to keep this kind of spoiler light, but what I will say about Tagah is I really loved Dave Bautista's approach to the character. There is a lot of nuance to this character, and honestly, every time I've seen Dave Bautista in anything or heard him in anything as an actor, I just think he's such a delight. I'd love to see him in more things. He brings a depth to this role that I think is necessary, because Tagah is a complex character. I mean, he is a character that is providing something magical for Aang. He thought he would be all alone and that he would be the last airbender and potentially the end of airbending in general. Will it ever return? We don't know at this point. And Aang is still young. Him and Katara don't have children yet. And he finds this guy frozen in the ice, Tagah, and now he has another airbender. And that is huge. And I think seeing the way that they bond together, seeing them also understand one another's trauma and what they've lost in the world, that was really beautiful. And then later in the film, with where they take the character of Tagah, wow, it's just such an interesting shift. And Dave Bautista does such a great job with it. And we also, of course, have Sonam in this as well, who is another avatar that we get to meet, and I loved her as well. I loved what we did with the mythos in this, just adding this story of a time when the air nomads were essentially ruling most of the world because they were the peacekeepers. They kept peace between everyone, and there was this huge time of peace where the air nomads were handling a lot of issues, and everyone was feeling pretty good until they were attacked by the Earth Kingdom. And going into that story of what happened to them in the past, and this idea of having a staff that connects to the spirit world, that can give people the gift of bending, being able to channel, harness the skill, the talent, the gift of unlocking bending in people, like how the turtles did. I think that is something that is really cool. I love what we're doing to grow the mythos, and some of the stuff that we even see in this connects back to parts of the story that we know from Korra, like us having sky bisons in Korra. We do get into some of that in this story, which I think is cool. I think overall this is a really cool idea for a story, and I would have loved to see what they could have done with it if they had a little bit more time. It is challenging because it is an animated movie, and really for an animated film, most people will tell you the best runtime for that type of story is around 90 minutes. That's why a lot of those films tend to be 90 minutes. However, there are exceptions to that rule. You can definitely have a longer animated film if you have enough story to fill it with, which I think this would have. And I actually think this probably was intended to be more of a season. I could see this being pitched as a season story because while everything in it is fine, I didn't have any major issues with how the story played out. There are a lot of MacGuffins in it. The staff is essentially a MacGuffin. There's a lot of convenient things that happen for the plot, a lot of places that are overlapping in terms of the lore and the mythos from the world that we're establishing in this story. So that is something that I was a little like, okay. But at the same time, you know, we got 90 minutes. So how do we get through everything and do it in a timely fashion and still give the emotional weight to the moments that need that? And I think the best way to do that is to kind of compress the story a bit, condense it a little bit. That's what they did. It still makes sense, but if we had a whole season, I could see this being a really cool story with a lot of depth and a lot of layers to it. There's so much more that I think they could have done and that they could have added if they had time. Granted, I think they did the best with the time that they had, and they did pretty good. It feels like this could have been a season of a show that would start off like Avatar Aang Volume 2, where we're journeying along with Aang and the gang as they are now young adults coming into their own after we've dealt with everything, and we're looking at the problems that come up afterwards as they try to continue to maintain balance in the world, and as we build up the world into what it becomes in the future. I think that is actually a cool idea for a few seasons of a show for a whole story, but I guess maybe what happened was it was pitched as a season and then they just didn't have the resources, so it had to be a movie. I don't know. Maybe it was never pitched as a season, but it feels like it has that potential. It's really hard to do interim stories, I think, that exist between points in a character's life, because we have Avatar The Last Airbender, the main series, and then we have The Legend of Korra, and Aang and company are in that as well, and we get to see sort of where they ended up. And this is a story that exists in the in-between. So what that means is we have to be a little bit careful with what we do. We can't do anything too crazy that would contradict what we know from the future, but it has to also stay in line with who these characters were in the past. So you have more parameters around the storytelling when you do a kind of interim story. And I think for the most part, they did a pretty good job with it. There are some things that I wonder about for Aang's character, having now gone through this adventure in the movie, how that would have actually changed him in the future and kind of how he is with his kids. I just think it's interesting where he ends up based on what we learn about him in this story and what he learns about himself. However, that being said, a lot has happened even in between probably this story and where we see Aang in Legend of Korra, so that isn't to say that something else couldn't have shifted him along the way. There's a lot of stuff that has probably happened, but it's also that this is a pretty big event. The idea of potentially airbenders returning to the world, this epic fight that it leads to at the end of the movie with the staff and Republic City and all these pieces that are involved. You would think maybe in Korra we would have heard something about this, but I don't remember it ever being alluded to. So that's the challenge. Now, granted, we do have the Sky Bisons, so there's that element, and that is something that we do know about from Korra, and that is something that is in here. And we also have the Denied, and the Denied are a group of non-benders who feel that because they can't bend, they're powerless, and so they're seeking a way to get power, to get that ability so that they can defend themselves. They're essentially mad at benders and want to blame them for all of the misfortune in their lives. And we know as well in Korra that there is a group of non-benders, there is a faction of non-benders that may have even come from the Denied. They might have their roots there. That's what some people are saying, and I definitely could see some of those connections. But overall, I think this story was pretty good. It was a good story, good voice acting cast, great animation, and I had a fun time with it. It didn't capture me as much as the original series did, but I also was watching it in transit and have been jet lagged, so I don't really blame the story as much for that one. I think when it comes to Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender, if you're wondering if this is something that you need to watch, it depends on what you want to get out of it, because if you want something that is going to really be a big part of the lore in the world and building out these parts of the world that are integral for everything that comes after or came before, this is kind of light on that. It really is a self-contained story that can exist just in this bubble so that doesn't rock the boat on either side too much, but at the same time getting to see these characters come back together and see them go on an adventure and see them get some closure for things in their past that, are we kind of retreading? Did we kind of already do some of these things in Avatar The Last Airbender, the show? Like Aang dealing with the guilt around leaving the nomads and then all of them being wiped out. Did we already deal with that? Yeah, we kind of did. But is there still an opportunity for more closure there? I definitely think there is, because when you're rebuilding the world and you're seeing everyone come into this place where now they can be happy and there can be peace, to also realize that like your culture is gone, that's got to be hard. And I'm sure that opened up that old wound for Aang. So getting to see him re-explore that and really come to terms with forgiving himself, I thought it was beautifully done. And I also feel like the end of Tagah in this, it was moving. I was moved. So I think if you just like the characters and you enjoy the world and you want to go on an adventure in it with a little bit of light lore building, then this is a fun time, and I think you will enjoy it. Is it something you'll have to watch? I mean, we'll have to see what happens with Avatar in the future to know for sure, but it's definitely an enjoyable story, so I think you might have to watch it for the fact that it's fun. That's what I would say. There was one little issue that I had, I guess, which was how are these newly powered airbenders able to take on Aang and his friends? You know, they just got these airbending powers and now they seem to be wreaking all kinds of havoc in the story. What I will say about that is, I think it kind of does make sense. The more that I think about it, the more that I realized I was fine with it, because when I think about the original series, Avatar Aang is the last airbender. That's the name of the show. He's the last airbender, so his friends would have never really come up against any other airbenders. Maybe they've sparred with Aang a little bit here and there, but that's not going to be the same kind of fight that they're getting into in this. And I think maybe they were caught off guard by the fact that they've never really had to deal with the air element in this way. So even though these benders might seem like they must be masterclass even though they just got their powers, I think it's more likely that they're just all right, but we're having a group of amazing characters who are very powerful, very strong, coming up against something they've never dealt with before. And so they get a little tilted, but to be honest, they still do pretty well, I think, even in that final fight. So I don't feel like Team Avatar has been weakened in any way. I think they're still super strong, and it was cool getting to see them come up against a challenge that they hadn't really encountered before. And that's another cool thing about this story. We've never really done a story that's been quite like this. So while it feels like one overly long episode of a show that, yeah, I would have loved to see this as a whole season, to be honest with you, I still had such a good time with it, and I think it still really works. So overall, pretty happy with it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this movie, so let me know down in the comments. Did you like the movie? Why or why not? How are you feeling about the direction of Avatar right now, and are you excited for the new show? Because I gotta react to a trailer. I hear we're doing a new Avatar. Who dis? I'm excited. Anyways, that's all my thoughts on this. I'll see you down in the comments, and until next time, friends, as always, stay nerdy. Bye! And if you love hearing me talk about Avatar, we do that here, and you can check out more of that by clicking right over here.